Welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 3, Episode 2. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
Well, in this episode, Steve, we wanted to focus on the thinking around post-COVID, the post-COVID era, as we turn our minds to that. You wrote a great article in Forbes, actually kind of a lengthy article. It was a great
Too
read.
long is what you're saying?
Well, no, it's longer than your average Forbes article, which are kind of snack size,
Yeah.
but it looked like you were really starting to get that framework, post-COVID framework. What did you call it? The hybridization of retail. So,
Right.
we're going to get into that in the episode, but when you were putting fingers to keyboards, give me a top line. What were you thinking, just to give a preview of what's to come in the episode?
Well, I've gotten really interested in this idea. In fact, I've got a new keynote based on it. I touch on it in the book. First, I thought about it mainly as this idea of physical and digital being more hybrid. But then as I started to think about it more, I saw this hybridization appearing in a number of places, physical stores becoming more hybrid, supply chain, go-to-market strategies with different formats. So I've just been kind of delving into that and seeing some of the trends and trying to organize it in a little bit different way. So I got some of that out in the Forbes article. There's, believe it or not, a few things I left out that I would have liked to include because it was getting quite lengthy. So in this episode, we get to, as we say, unpack that a little bit.
Well, before we get to the episode, we should probably talk about anything that's struck your attention or grabbed your attention in the retail news. I have a question for you. Are you a fan of the movie Scarface by Al Pacino? Scarface, remember that movie? Are you a fan?
I do. I actually had a big pile of stuff in front of me that I cleared off before we shot the episode. But yes, I am.
Well, there's a scene in it which I love, which is how he says, "I'm making moves. He's coming from nothing and he's making moves." It feels like that's the theme for what's happening in retail now, right? The COVID era is, largely behind us. And I see a bunch of moves happening. Some moves should have been done years ago that kind of jumped out, but other moves are starting to get interesting. And that's what's grabbed my attention. What do you think? Anything jump out at you?
Yeah, there's a lot of activity. I mean, which we've touched on a little bit. A lot of store openings that are going on the part of traditional players and digitally native brands. We're seeing a lot of partnerships. So Nordstrom announcing, I guess last week or this week, acquisition and partnerships with ASOS and some of their brands, which I think is part of stuff we've gotten into before, which is just some of these originally online only brands need that physical presence, whether it's their own stores or partnering up with people like Nordstrom, Target, et cetera. But it's also, I think, an interesting strategy on the part of retailers to go out and find these brands that are relatively new, innovative, maybe attract a younger customer. In Nordstrom's case, that's a challenge, but also give retailers a point of differentiation compared, it's not products that can easily be shopped on Amazon, for example, or they're not brands that are carried at your most direct competitors. So I think it makes a lot of sense.
Well, I mean, that's a great point. It's like they're a captive brand, right? Because if you're not on Amazon, we know Amazon's now the biggest fashion retailer, but fashion is more like apparel, right? Basics, basically. They're a big basics retailer. So that's a nice place, I think it feels like, for Nordstrom to play. One thing that grabbed my attention, we talked about it off mic, was this big global investment into Flipkart, which is in India. And it caught my attention because my pension invested in it. The Canadian pension plan was a big investor in it. So it caught the Canadian attention that, making moves globally. To me, it feels like that we're going to enter. Look, and you got to partner with somebody. It's not unusual for partnerships to be happening all year long, right?
Sure.
But I just feel like there's going to be a lot happening. Some of it is, should have happened maybe 2 years ago or longer. But the other thing I wanted to get your feedback on was eMarketer put out some results on e-commerce, some very interesting results,
right.
I thought. And you said you had a couple of takeaways from it. So what was your observation about their latest numbers?
Well, folks may be familiar with eMarketer. They do a lot of forecast statistics, research in e-commerce in particular. So they updated their forecast this week for the U.S. e-commerce market. And there were a few things that jumped out. And I guess we'll put the link in the show notes so people can see.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
to no one's surprise, big spike in e-commerce sales last year. Starting to see it, or at least the forecast is that it will moderate quite a bit this year. Not totally unexpected, but I'd say the big takeaway in terms of the overall numbers is that they predict we're largely going to get back to kind of the pace we have seen for really a decade, which is e-commerce growing in the vicinity of 15% year over year. Brick and mortar sales, despite the retail apocalypse narrative, still positive, though barely. So the share is changing, but we're really going to get into be at a higher level by virtue of the pandemic, but kind of settle back into a pretty similar pattern. The second thing, and I go into this quite a bit in chapter 6 of my book, Shameless Promotion. The chapter is called "The Future Will Not Be Evenly Distributed," quoting a great Canadian, William Gibson. But among the things I get into that chapter is a lot of times when we talk about, well, e-commerce is 15% of total retail, or 20%, or 22%, or whatever. That's the entire industry. And what this data shows, which I've known, but they really cull it out or present it in more detail, are the widely different market share penetration depending upon the category. So books, music, games, office supplies, 50, 60, 70% online share. And then you get into like auto parts and grocery, and it's low to mid single digits. So
Right.
I think most people generally know this, but nobody except Amazon, maybe, in Walmart is in every category. So it's much more important to look at what's going on in your particular category. The other piece, which we've talked about a million times, is there's the aspect that is really pure e-commerce, where the store is not involved, and then there's the e-commerce where stores are very much involved. Which maybe brings me to number 3, which is, and this has been pretty true, I think, for a number of years, is that if you look at the top 10 companies in e-commerce, 7 of the 10 are mostly brick and mortar retail. So Amazon, eBay, Wayfair in the top 10 as more or less pure plays. But then you've got Walmart, Apple, Home Depot, Target, Best Buy, Costco, Kroger as the other big players. And I thought there was another thing I was going to mention, and now I forgot what it was. So it must not have been that important.
Well, one of the things that jumped out at me, a couple of things jumped out at me. Interesting to see Kroger on that list, of course, because groceries had a big acceleration. 2, I actually think when I look at the list, I'm on the fence about eBay even being on that list, because I know their business has changed a lot, but mostly they're a marketplace for me to buy from you, Pez dispensers. Again, we're probably going to hear from somebody from eBay about that, but really, there's a lot of direct commerce going on. But there's also there's a lot of peer-to-peer commerce going on. So they belong on a list. I'm not sure they belong on the same list some days. So that even makes brick and mortar even more accentuated in terms of just in terms of their presence. Amazon looks like they got a big share, right? 44%. Other folks, catching up. And let me give you some Canadian context. So Canada has typically been a bit behind the US for a whole bunch of reasons in adoption. But last year we had about 70 to 75% growth in e-commerce, which is number 2 in the world. Argentina had more growth than us, it was 100%. We had a pretty big base to start from. So Canada's just I think had a bigger acceleration. I think if the US moved forward 2 years, we've moved forward 5. All going in the same direction, all the same trends. More similarities and differences.
And why do you think that is?
Well, the reason I think we were just farther behind, and it gave Canadians a lot of impetus to go do it, try it more often, particularly in grocery. And grocery, 4.2 million Canadians shopped online for grocery last year, according to my podcast partner Sylvain Charlebois for the Food Professor. 4.2 million Canadians. Don't forget, there's only 18 million adult Canadians. Huge. And grocery spins the flywheel.
Right.
The other thing that is very different is Canada locked down much, much harder. I mean, retailers, non-essential retailers in Ontario, where I am, biggest province, were shut down for 155 days. Closed for 155 days. The malls just opened up last week.
Right.
E-commerce had an unnatural lift. That waterline's going to settle, but it's not going to settle where it was. I think that's big contributing factors.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's interesting.
And so, listen, all right, well, this is good. It's summertime. You wouldn't expect us to have any news to talk about, but, it's not a usual summer. Now, before we get to the episode it's retail. Yeah, before we get to the episode, we talk about hybridization. I just want to remind all the folks that we've got a YouTube channel now. So make sure and check into the YouTube channel. These podcast episodes every 2 weeks until Labor Day. And then we go weekly. And coming up next week, we've got Drew Green, CEO of Indochino, who's done his own deal with Nordstrom, which we're going to talk about. And it's great to have Drew back on the mic. So we're looking forward to that. So, all right, if you liked what you heard or saw today, please follow us on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcast platform. So you can catch up on all our great interviews and insights and episodes that'll show up every week if you subscribe. Be sure and check out, as I said, our new YouTube channel, Remarkable Retail. And Steve, over to you.
Well, I'm always shamelessly promoting my book, Remarkable Retail, How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption, which is available just about everywhere that you'd like to find your books in ebook format and audiobook as well. And I'm on social media, usually at stephenpdennis.com. You can also find me on my website, which is www.stephenpdennis.com.
All right, and I'm Michael LeBlanc, the producer and host of the Voice of Retail podcast and a bunch of other stuff. You can find me on LinkedIn or meleblanc.co, or should I say www.meleblanc.co.
I know, I was going old school.
You went old school on that.
That's fun, HTTP.
How do I get to a URL again?
I can't
remember. Back to the Future.